The corridors of Horizon 9 hummed with a quiet intensity that Lyra Venson had grown accustomed to during her 3-year assignment. Sleek metallic walls reflected the soft blue ambient lighting, a design choice meant to calm the diverse species that called this research station home. As a senior communications specialist, Lyra had seen her fair share of unusual encounters, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment her new neighbor arrived. Zoran Krell stood nearly 2 feet taller than the average human, his iridescent exoskeleton catching the corridor lights in a mesmerizing display of shifting colors. Where human skin would be smooth, his body was covered in intricate, scale-like patterns that seemed to pulse with an inner light. His 4 arms moved with a grace that belied his impressive size, carefully maneuvering a collection of delicate scientific equipment through the station's narrow passageways. "Excuse me," Lyra called out, her professional tone masking her curiosity. "Need a hand with those containers?" Zoran turned, his large compound eyes, a kaleidoscope of emerald and silver, fixing on her with an intensity that made Lyra momentarily forget how to breathe. "Negative," he responded, his translator producing a voice that was both mechanical and strangely melodic. Nexus Collective Training ensures optimal personal equipment management. It was their first real interaction, though Lyra had seen him around the station. Zoran was part of a diplomatic research team from the Nexus Collective, a complex interstellar alliance known for its advanced communication technologies and strict social protocols. The station's living quarters were designed to accommodate multiple species, with modular spaces that could be adjusted to various atmospheric and gravitational requirements. Lyra's quarters sat directly adjacent to Zoran's, a proximity that would prove both challenging and unexpected in the weeks to come. That evening, as Lyra completed her routine communication system diagnostics, an unusual vibration began to pulse through the station's walls. At first, she thought it was a technical malfunction, a common occurrence in the complex systems of Horizon 9. But the rhythm seemed too deliberate, too organic to be mechanical. Her communication specialist training kicked in. She began running diagnostic scans, checking for any anomalies that might explain the strange vibration. Nothing showed up on her initial screens, no structural issues, no power fluctuations, no environmental irregularities. A soft chime at her door interrupted her investigation. Zoran stood outside, his exoskeleton now displaying a pattern of deep crimson and electric blue, colors that seemed to pulse in time with the vibration she'd been hearing. "Specialist Venson," he began, his translator struggling slightly with the pronunciation, "I require assistance with a matter of potential cross-species sensitivity." Lyra raised an eyebrow. In her experience, anything described as cross-species sensitive was bound to be complicated. "Go on," she prompted. What Zoran explained next would challenge everything Lyra understood about interstellar diplomacy, communication, and the very nature of intelligent life. The Nexus Collective, it seemed, was approaching a critical biological cycle, one that would have profound implications for the entire research station. And somehow, Lyra had become unexpectedly central to managing what could become an intergalactic diplomatic incident. Little did she know, the next few weeks would test her skills, her understanding, and her very perception of what it meant to communicate across species lines. The vibration continued, a subtle reminder that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The station's conference room buzzed with an undercurrent of nervous energy. Lyra sat near the back, her communication specialist's tablet open, fingers hovering uncertainly over the display. Representatives from 3 different star systems filled the room, humans from Earth's diplomatic corps, delegates from the Nexus Collective, and neutral observers from the Galactic Mediation Council. Zoran Krell stood at the far end of the room, his exoskeleton now displaying a complex pattern of muted grays and deep blues, a color combination Lyra had learned indicated intense concentration or diplomatic stress. The vibrations she'd experienced in her quarters seemed to have intensified, creating a subtle background hum that made the humans in the room increasingly uncomfortable. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the station's lead human administrator, cleared her throat. "The recent communication disruptions cannot be ignored," she began, her voice tight with controlled frustration. 3 separate communication arrays have gone offline in the past 72 hours, all coinciding with the Nexus Collective's presence on Horizon 9. Zoran's response was immediate. Correlation does not imply causation, Administrator Rodriguez. The Nexus Collective maintains absolute commitment to diplomatic protocols. Lyra watched the exchange carefully. Something wasn't adding up. Her communication specialist instincts were firing on all cylinders. There was more happening beneath the surface of this seemingly routine diplomatic tension. During a brief recess, she approached Zoran. "May I speak with you privately?" she asked, careful to maintain a professional distance. The alien's compound eyes shifted, reflecting her image in multiple fragmented views. "Affirmative," he responded, following her to a nearby communication hub, a small, soundproofed room typically used for sensitive transmissions. "The vibrations," Lyra began, "they're not just a technical anomaly, are they?" Zoran's exoskeleton shifted through a rapid sequence of colors, surprise, hesitation, and something that might have been concern. "You perceive more than most of your species," he said carefully. "The current cycle is delicate." Before he could elaborate, alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights began to pulse, and the station's AI announced a critical systems breach. Multiple communication networks were collapsing, creating a cascading failure that threatened to isolate Horizon 9 from the rest of the galaxy. Lyra's training kicked in. Her fingers flew across her communication tablet, attempting to isolate and repair the network failures. But something was different this time. The system failures seemed almost organic, as if they were being deliberately manipulated. "What's happening?" she demanded, turning to Zoran. The alien's response was unexpected. "We are being hunted," he said, his translator carrying a tone that sounded remarkably like fear. A massive energy surge rippled through the station's systems. Holographic displays flickered and died. Emergency protocols engaged, sealing critical sections of Horizon 9. In the chaos, Lyra caught a glimpse of something moving outside the station's massive viewports, a shape that didn't match any known spacecraft design. Zoran's 4 arms moved with incredible speed, securing critical communication equipment. "The cycle," he muttered, more to himself than to Lyra, "they cannot be allowed to interrupt the cycle." As system after system went dark, Lyra realized they were facing something far more complex than a simple diplomatic misunderstanding. Whatever was happening involved something fundamental to the Nexus Collective, something that went beyond standard interstellar politics. The station held its breath, suspended in the darkness of space, with unknown threats closing in from all sides. The emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow across Horizon 9's main corridor. Lyra and Zoran moved with practiced caution, the station's usual hum replaced by an unsettling silence. Communication systems remained offline, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. "Explain," Lyra demanded, her hand resting near the emergency communication device attached to her belt. "What's hunting you?" Zoran's exoskeleton shifted through a complex pattern of deep blues and silvery grays, a visual language of emotional complexity that Lyra was slowly learning to interpret. "The Void Hunters," he replied, his translator carrying a note of something between resignation and barely contained tension. "They are not a species as you understand the term. They are more of a biological algorithm, designed to hunt and extract specific genetic sequences." A distant explosion rocked the station. Emergency seals automatically engaged, compartmentalizing sections to prevent total destruction. Lyra's training kicked in, her mind racing through potential survival strategies. "And they're after you?" she pressed. Zoran's 4 arms moved in a gesture that seemed to combine defensive posturing with something almost like embarrassment. "Not precisely. They are after what my species carries during the current biological cycle." The pieces began to fall into place. The vibrations. The communication disruptions. The strange energy signatures. Something about Zoran's current biological state was attracting a threat far beyond a simple diplomatic incident. Another series of impacts struck the station's outer hull. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing multiple unidentified vessels surrounding Horizon 9. They moved with a precision that defied traditional combat tactics, more like predators than ships. "We need to get to the communication hub," Zoran said suddenly. "There is a transmission that must be sent." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Our communication systems are down." "How exactly dash?" Before she could finish, Zoran produced a small crystalline device. It pulsed with an inner light that seemed to defy the station's emergency lighting. "Not all communication requires traditional technology," he explained. As they made their way through the station's increasingly damaged corridors, Lyra realized they were being hunted. Shadowy movement caught her peripheral vision, something that moved with impossible speed and precision. A section of the wall suddenly liquefied, revealing a creature that defied description. Metallic and organic, it moved like liquid mercury, its form constantly shifting. One moment it resembled a complex mechanical construct, the next a biological nightmare. "Void Hunter," Zoran whispered. The creature moved with impossible speed. Lyra felt time slow down. Her training kicked in, years of communication specialist protocols mixing with pure survival instinct. She reached for an emergency plasma cutter, knowing full well it would likely do little against such an advanced threat. Zoran's exoskeleton began to pulse with an intense light. The crystal device in his hand transformed, extending tendrils of energy that seemed to weave through the very fabric of the station's reality. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his translator carrying a tone of absolute certainty. The Void Hunter paused, as if analyzing this unexpected resistance. Lyra saw multiple sensory appendages emerge, scanning, calculating, preparing to strike. In that moment, she understood that this was far more than a simple diplomatic mission. Something fundamental was at stake, something that could potentially alter the balance of power in the entire galaxy. The station held its breath. The Void Hunter prepared to attack. And Zoran stood ready, with Lyra at his side. The corridor seemed to warp and twist around them, reality bending in ways that defied conventional physics. Zoran's crystalline device projected a protective field that shimmered like liquid starlight, creating a barrier between them and the Void Hunter. "This is not a typical confrontation," Zoran explained, his translator struggling to convey the complexity of the moment. "The Void Hunters are not simply seeking to destroy. They are attempting to extract something." Lyra's communication specialist training kicked into overdrive. She recognized patterns in the creature's movements, not random, but calculated. "They're scanning," she realized aloud. But scanning for what? The Void Hunter responded to her words with a burst of energy that rippled through the station's infrastructure. Holographic displays erupted with incomprehensible data streams, genetic sequences, quantum entanglement diagrams, and biological algorithms that seemed to dance and shift with impossible complexity. "My species undergoes a critical biological transformation," Zoran said, his four arms moving in a defensive posture. "During this cycle, we become vulnerable. Valuable." Another section of the station's hull breached. The vacuum of space seemed to reach in like a hungry predator, but Zoran's energy field held firm. Lyra noticed something extraordinary: the field wasn't just protecting them. It was actively communicating with the station's systems, rewriting damage protocols in real time. "We need to reach the central communication array," Zoran declared. "There is a message that must be transmitted." The Void Hunter's form began to multiply. What was once a single entity now became multiple fluid constructs, each moving with precise, calculated movements. They were learning, adapting with each passing moment. Lyra's hand found an emergency communication override. "We'll never make it through conventionally," she said. "We need a different approach." Zoran's exoskeleton pulsed with an intense light. "Then we create our own path." The crystal device in his hand transformed. Tendrils of energy extended, interfacing directly with the station's communication systems. Lyra watched in amazement as quantum frequencies she'd never seen before began to weave through Horizon 9's infrastructure. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Communicating," Zoran replied. "Not just with machines. With the very fabric of space itself." The Void Hunters converged. Their attack was a symphony of destruction, energy patterns that could dissolve matter, quantum disruption fields that could unravel molecular bonds. But Zoran stood firm, the crystal device now fully integrated with both his biological systems and the station's core. Lyra realized they were no longer just resisting. They were sending a message. A transmission began to form, not in words, but in complex mathematical patterns. Genetic sequences that spoke of survival, of adaptation, of a species fighting to preserve its most fundamental essence. The station itself seemed to breathe. Systems that had been damaged began to reconstruct themselves. The Void Hunters paused, their fluid forms suddenly uncertain. "We are more than what can be extracted," Zoran said, his voice carrying a weight that transcended his translator. "We are a message. We are resistance." The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. This was about more than survival. This was about declaring the right to exist, to transform, to choose. As the transmission reached its peak, Lyra understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a communication so profound it could potentially change the understanding of life itself. The Void Hunters began to retreat. The aftermath of the transmission left Horizon 9 transformed. Where destruction had moments ago threatened to consume everything, now a strange stillness prevailed. Zoran's crystal device slowly dimmed, its energy seemingly absorbed back into his exoskeleton. "We've done more than survive," Zoran said, his translator carrying a tone of quiet triumph. "We've communicated." Lyra looked around the reconstructed corridor. Impossible damage had been reversed, systems that should have been beyond repair now hummed with renewed energy. "Communicated?" she asked. That was more like a quantum battle cry. A series of holographic displays flickered to life around them, showing multiple star systems receiving fragments of their transmission. It wasn't just a message of resistance, it was a declaration of something more fundamental. Dr. Elena Rodriguez burst into the corridor, her usual diplomatic composure shattered. "What exactly happened here?" she demanded. Her eyes darted between Lyra and Zoran, trying to make sense of the impossible scene before her. Zoran's exoskeleton shifted to a calm blue-green pattern. "A negotiation," he explained. "Not through words. Through essence." The Galactic Mediation Council's emergency frequencies began to light up. Whatever transmission Zoran had sent was causing ripples across multiple interstellar communication networks. Lyra watched in amazement as diplomatic channels that had been dormant for decades suddenly came alive with activity. "The Void Hunters won't return," Zoran said with absolute certainty. "Not to us. Not to our sector." Lyra's communication specialist training kicked in. "That's impossible. No single transmission could dash." "Not a transmission," Zoran interrupted. "A translation. Of survival. Of potential." Emergency protocols began to wind down. The station's AI started recalibrating systems, slowly bringing everything back to normal operational status. But nothing would be the same again. In the days that followed, reports began to stream in from across multiple star systems. The Void Hunters, a threat that had systematically hunted various species for generations, were retreating. Not just from Horizon 9, but from entire galactic sectors. Zoran explained it in fragments. His species' biological cycle wasn't just a simple reproductive process. It was a moment of profound transformation, of quantum potential that could communicate on levels beyond traditional understanding. "We become a message," he told Lyra during a debriefing. "Not just a species. A living communication." The Nexus Collective's diplomatic status changed overnight. What had once been seen as a mysterious, somewhat isolated species was now recognized as something far more significant. They weren't just diplomats or researchers, they were living translators of a universal language. Lyra found herself at the center of something unprecedented. Her report would reshape human understanding of interstellar communication, of biological potential, of what it meant to truly communicate. As the station's observation deck opened to the vast expanse of space, Zoran turned to her. "We are more than we appear," he said. "Always." The crystal device pulsed softly in his hand, a reminder of the extraordinary communication that had just reshaped their understanding of existence. Horizon 9 continued its journey through space, carrying with it a message of resistance, of transformation, of hope.